We are talking about cybercrime today, and I'm joined by Jorge Espina, who is Deputy National Member for Spain and Chair of Eurojust's Cybercrime team. Hello, Jorge.
Hello.
Jorge, cybercrime is a very general term. What does it actually mean? Is every crime that is committed via the internet automatically a cybercrime?
Well, not necessarily. Indeed, this is a label that if used too widely can lead us to think that almost everything would end up being a cybercrime. The core cybercrime that we have in mind is those type of crimes committed through complex and IT equipment and IT fraud, etc. But there are a number of other crimes which are also connected to the cyber world. This is what we call the cyber enhanced or cyber facilitated crimes, which would mean other types of crime in which at some point in the preparation, in the execution, in the covering up, uses IT equipment, uses IT devices, uses the advantages that for criminals the cyberspace offers. So we have somehow to keep a balance because we need at some point to decide which is the main factor in a given crime to get the label which would be cybercrime, with drug trafficking. Normally you have a mixture of all of them because organized criminal groups are the ones using cyber-enhanced crime to pursue their illicit purposes and to commit other types of crimes. So indeed, it's a little bit difficult to come to a very precise definition, but mainly I would say that in all those acts in which the main or at least a very important factor is cyber-related, that would fall under the type of the general type of cybercrime that we are thinking of. Yes.
Why are cybercrime cases an important part of what Eurojust does?
Well, it is because it is an important part for society in general and for our true clients, so to speak, which are our colleagues in the member states, judicial authorities that are the ones who are actually dealing with those cases, prosecutors, investigative judges, adjudicating judges, etc., etc. So since this is a problem for them, since this is a need, we are here to help them as we are doing in any other area of crime. We are, from that perspective, we could be labeled as service providers to our colleagues. So since they have this need for carrying out properly judicial cooperation within the European Union, but also with third states, that is our task, that is our mandate, and that's why we are trying to help them. And we help them, like in other crime areas, in two ways. One is what I would call the vertical way, which is the operation itself, when there is a concrete case in which international coordination needs arise, they can come to us and we can help facilitate that cooperation or that coordination through the contacts that we have with our colleagues from other delegations, who in turn are in direct contact with the national authorities, who are the ones who execute the mutual legal assistance requests or the mutual recognition instruments that need to be used. This is purely, let's say, vertical. It is concentrating on the case, and that is dealt with exclusively by those who can have access to that data. That's the competent authority, the competent desk, and the competent authorities in the other member states. But together with this, or precisely because we do this every day, we get a very interesting knowledge that it would be a pity if it wasn't used, if it wasn't shared to improve what we all do. So here's where we do what I call the horizontal tasks of Eurojust, which is putting in common all that knowledge that we have gotten through the cases, and of course without sharing any operational case, any personal data, because we are not allowed to do that, and we do not want that to happen. Imagine that many of these investigations are confidential, a secret, but if we are aware of a problem or we are aware of a solution or a good practice that could be shared with our colleagues, we work together. Normally we do it through teams. There's a dedicated cybercrime team, as you mentioned at the beginning, and here's where we discuss, where we cooperate with EU institutions, for instance, when they have surveys, when they want to to make studies or follow-up reports to get to know the way the instruments work in practice. We are the ones who have that knowledge. And this complements very well, I think, the operational vertical activity that is, in fact, the main activity for Eurojust and the one that made our legislators think that an agency such as this was necessary already 20 years ago.
When we look at the operational work, what are the specific challenges of cybercrime?
This is an area where everything is changing so fast that I think the first challenge that we have is to try to react at the adequate speed to the changing environment we are living in. Of course, as in any other crime area, it would also be very good to be able, and we try to prevent things from happening, but we have to acknowledge that normally the criminals change their behavior whenever we find a way to counter the previous one. So in this particular area, you have to be particularly good at keeping pace with them. And that means, among other things, keeping pace from the technological viewpoint. Sometimes they are continuously devising new methods, and the moment you hear about them, and here it's not only what we do, but basically what the law enforcement agencies at Europol, as our sister agency, also take care of that. We have to be aware of everything that's going on in order to adapt the judicial mechanisms to be able to react in a swift and efficient manner to what is happening. And in particular in this area, and I would like to mention a sector which has been recently promoted at EU level as one of the most important ones, and as one of the flagship policies, which is the protection of victims. Here we have to deal with a very particular type of victims. Of course, we have the so-called the ordinary victims. Unfortunately, when we have these huge fraud schemes developed and disseminated through the internet, we end up having many victims. Some of them we won't even know that they exist. They are in all jurisdictions, and of course we need to take a look at them and to take care of them and to try to ensure that they're properly protected, that there's no double victimization. I mean, that the fact that there's an ongoing investigation doesn't end up bothering them as much or almost as much as the crime itself. But also we have a different type of victims. We have the big corporate victims when it is big companies that are attacked. I'm thinking of ransomware cases. And this needs a different type of reaction. This needs to create a certain level of trust between these corporate victims who sometimes are hesitant about even filing a complaint because that looks badly on them because they were not good enough to keep their own data secured from hackers or from attackers outside. So it's always a delicate balance, and this is something we need to deal with also from the judicial sector when trying to improve the legal reaction to these activities.
Mm-hmm. Let's have a look at Eurojust's concrete work. When we look at the casework, is there a specific case where you would say this demonstrates how the agency works?
In general, I think the added value of Eurojust is that we can give a general vision and an overview that normally the competent national authority does not have or does not necessarily have. When you're dealing with a case as a prosecutor or as an investigative judge, you know very well your case. But what you think is the most important case, perhaps, or a very big case, might end up being a tiny little part of a much bigger criminal organization, only that it is not operating within what you can control, and perhaps it's based in several other member states, or in third countries. I think this is our first big added value, that we can get to know what's going on in several jurisdictions, and we can help them come here, bring their cases, and decide on a lot of important matters like who is in a better position to continue the prosecution, what type of help can be asked from other colleagues, etc., etc. Then you see in certain particular cases, what comes now to my mind is the breaking the encryption of secure channels put in place by the criminals to organize themselves. If through several cases, which the details I cannot elaborate, but through a joint work of the judicial authorities of certain member states and also the law enforcement agencies, we've managed to get hold of these decrypted data, and we've put them at the disposal of competent authorities throughout the European Union. And that's an excellent example on how the actions originally intended for a single case end up benefiting a lot of the college. And all that is possible thanks to the specific cooperation mechanisms that the EU has in place, among which in the judicial sector the main one is precisely this agency, is Eurojust.
So I understand it's all about collaboration, just like everything else that is being done here at Eurojust. Who are your main partners in fighting cybercrime?
Well, indeed, particularly in this area, it's very important or we're very glad to know that we're not alone to begin with. As in general, we cooperate with the EU institutions. Every time they seek our assistance, we try to provide. Even with the private sector, because as you can imagine, when we are talking about cybercrime, it is important to have good coordination or good relationship with the big tech companies that sometimes they are simple victims of the cybercrime, but sometimes they are also instruments used by the criminals. So in general, they're quite willing to cooperate. So to establish this partnership, public-private sector is very important. And also, I would like to mention that within Eurojust, we host the European Judicial Cybercrime Network. There are several networks hosted by Eurojust. This is the most recent one. It was established in 2016 by Council conclusions, and it brings together experts on cybercrime from all member states. Normally, these are the experts, not always, but normally the ones who are dealing with the most complex cases in their jurisdictions, but their role in the network is not operational. It wouldn't be vertical, to use the jargon I used before, but horizontal. Is they do in this particular area what we do at the teams, so to speak, at Eurojust. So they sit together, they share problems, they share solutions, they try to think of strategies, and having them at Eurojust, although they work as an autonomous network, it's a great thing, and it's a particularly good added value that help us also as an agency to better perform our mandate in this concrete area.
So what is the outcome of this work? What are the tangible results?
Well, I think apart from specific cases like the one I mentioned, I think it is already visible in numbers that the cases we are dealing with here at Eurojust are growing every year. According to the last statistics, we're close to 200 cybercrime cases, and one of our most interesting tools, which are the coordination meetings. I can tell you more about that right now if you like. We're close to 70 in 1 year. And I think this is important.
That's where you bring together prosecutors from all over.
Precisely. Mm-hmm. We open cases at the request of our authorities. And in those cases where it is evident that there are needs for coordination, we bring them here to The Hague. It is possible also to do it in the member states, but normally we have the infrastructure and the logistics to do it here. We provide interpretation, which is very important because, as you can imagine, our judicial authorities prefer to explain their sometimes extremely complex cases, each one in their own language. We have very good interpreters who take care of that. We bring them here, we sit them around the table, we explain our cases, and then we try to help them to move forward. Sometimes the way to move forward would be to agree on a joint action day where investigative measures need to be carried out simultaneously at the same time, on the very same date, at the very same hour, in sometimes several member states, and we can be instrumental to get that. Sometimes it is necessary or is convenient to establish a joint investigation team, and we help them to decide whether that is the case, to draft and to sign the agreement, to make the follow-up, and then to make an assessment and evaluation on the way it has worked. And I think all this makes more and more our judicial authorities aware of how we can help them. And I think that's what justifies these increasing numbers that I just told you. Particularly if we take into consideration that the fact that I just mentioned close to 200 cases, probably there are more. These are the ones that receive the specific label of cybercrime, but many of the, I think almost 400 cases on drug trafficking that we had last year, many of them would have started or had some connection also to some type of cyber investigation that helped discover some of the main elements. So as I said at the beginning, we have to be aware of the fact that these are not compartments that do not communicate with each other, but quite the contrary. But I think that the good news is that more and more our authorities, our judicial authorities, regard us as a reliable way to improve their investigations and to achieve the expected results.
Let me come back to something you said earlier when you were talking about victims. In principle, everybody can fall victim to cybercrime. If I may ask you a personal question. After having seen so many cybercrime cases, do you still buy things on the internet? Do you still book your vacation via the internet? Or in short, do you still trust the internet?
In short, yes, I still buy things in the internet, provided they're not too expensive. I can still do it. And I think the key to this is common sense. I mean, we have to be vigilant, we have to be prudent. And the fact, for instance, that there are robberies on the streets doesn't make people not go outside. You just go outside with a number of measures. Let's say you don't go late at night in certain, I don't know, streets with not enough illumination where you're not sure what the neighborhood is like. But that is, as I said, common sense. You have to surf the web through reliable, well-known websites. Sometimes it's not that you do it, it's that they come to you, and that's one technique that the criminals use. But it's important not to be in the internet with only half of your attention, I would say. If you have to be aware that it is in general a secure environment, but where there are a lot of criminals trying to use you and to use the internet to reach out to you and to commit their crimes. As long as we are vigilant, as I said, and as we are prudent, I think there is no need to be afraid of the cyberspace, which, as almost everything, can have a good use, can have a bad use. For those cases where unfortunately those crimes happen, this is what we try to do. We try to react at Eurojust, not directly, let me insist again, but by helping the national authorities, in our case the judicial national authorities, who are the ones in charge and who are the real owners of the cases, because it is them who would be investigating, prosecuting, and if everything goes according to plan, convicting those criminals that committed the crimes.
Thank you so much for being here today, Jorge.
Thanks to you. Thank you.